Hey everyone! Thank you for joining us for the Microsoft Fabric FabCon Global Hackathon. My name is Anna. I'll be your producer for this session. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenters to answer. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our speakers for today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Anna. So welcome everyone to the Bring All Your Data from Everywhere into OneLake with Microsoft Fabric. So my name is Somela Zadigo, and I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, part of the data advocacy team. You would have met my teammates, Paul and Josh, earlier on as we kicked off this hackathon. And I'm so excited to actually be with you today to share how you can be able to bring all of your data from everywhere into OneLake inside of Microsoft Fabric so that you can be able to get started with everything that you're looking for in terms of getting insights, getting AI insights from your data, and also getting all of that analytics. So you might be wondering if this is your first time hearing about Microsoft Fabric as part of this hackathon, and you're asking yourself, what is Microsoft Fabric? And most of the time when I look at Microsoft Fabric, I often like to compare to Microsoft Fabric to Microsoft Office. So you have Office as a suite of productivity tools such as your Word, your PowerPoint, your Excel. Each of those apps are actually optimized for a particular task, building spreadsheets or writing documents with using all of the different tools and apps that you have within Office. But the applications inside of Office share common elements, whether it's the user experience, how you do a spell check, or you copy and paste or format your text inside of each of those applications. But also at the foundational layer, when you look at Office, is how you govern the applications in Office and how you store and collaborate on files. But you might be wondering, how does this relate to Microsoft Fabric? So normally I want you to think about Microsoft Fabric in a similar way. You have it as a suite of analytics tools, whether that's for integrating your data, building a data warehouse, or analyzing your data with Power BI in that sense. Each of the tools inside of Microsoft Fabric share common elements similar to Office. You would have how to connect to data in Fabric, how you manage artifacts in your workspaces, and also how you move from your dev to your test to your production environment or production-ready data so that you can be able to get your insights from that data. But also, they share the foundational layers of Microsoft Fabric, so how you manage your security inside of Fabric, and also you manage compliance centrally, and also how you store and collaborate on data, and lastly, how you govern the entire platform. So what you see on the screen right now is actually the different workloads or experiences inside of Fabric, from your data factory, which will be the one that we're probably going to focus on today because it allows you to ingest data from different kinds of data sources, be it your CSV files, be it your SQL databases, and so forth. And then you have the analytics, where you could have data engineering and data science together. And we also have something called Fabric databases, where you'd find, for an example, SQL inside of Microsoft Fabric. And we have real-time intelligence, which is also one of the sessions that you're probably going to get after this one as part of this hackathon, where you are able to ingest real-time data, and then you are able to try and be able to get insights from that real-time data. And then there's Power BI, as I mentioned earlier on, is you getting your insights by building your dashboards and reports using Power BI. And all of these experiences are actually AI enabled. You find Copilot experiences, for an example, throughout of the different experiences inside of Fabric. You'll find a Copilot for Data Factory that assists you into assist you into being able to ingest your data, transform it, and clean it so that you can make it AI ready. And then OneLake, most of the time I like to think of OneLake as your OneDrive for data, similar to OneDrive, where you are storing files and you're collaborating on files. In this case, OneLake is more on you collaborating on your data. And then Purview is where you are able to manage your security and compliance and governance, as I mentioned earlier on. Now, underneath it all, as I mentioned earlier on, which is OneLake, which is a OneDrive for data, instead of spinning up new lakes, for an example, inside of Fabric for every project or team, you will be able to get like a single software as a service lake for the entire company or entire organization or your entire project that you're working on. And every Fabric workload, be it your analytics, your databases, your real-time data, even Power BI would write to and read the data from OneLake. It uses an open format, so you can be able to avoid like login, and it's automatically indexed for things like data discovery, compliance, and lineage. So with OneLake, all data is findable, shareable, and ready for AI from day one. So you'll be able to see today as how we can be able to bring in data from all of these different kinds of data sources that you may or may not have. Now, bringing your data from anywhere, how does that work, right? So in this case, think about it this way. If your data is living everywhere, so for an example, it's living across multiple clouds, across multiple applications, across multiple databases, it will make it hard for you to gain insights from your data, right? So within Fabric, you can be able to get a simplified way of how you can bring that data into OneLake, reducing your duplication and your data movement instead of moving your data from one platform into Fabric so that you can be able to start gaining insights from it. You can then be able to use the different ways to bring data into Microsoft Fabric, and one of those ways is actually shortcuts. Shortcuts allows you to virtualize data from places like your Azure, your Amazon, or even on-prem data without having to duplicate that data. And in the cases of your databases, and databases being your Azure SQL, be it your PostgreSQL, you can be able to have mirroring inside of Fabric, which keeps a live synced replica in OneLake, ready for analytics and your Copilot or your AI insights that you may be trying to draw from your data. And with open mirroring, which is also one of the things that we're going to be talking about today, is where you can be able to have partners and apps that can push data directly into Fabric using open APIs and Delta tables. And we're going to touch on that a little bit on how you can be able to get started with open mirroring inside of Microsoft Fabric. So think about it as a modern way to unify your data estate without the usual complexity of having to replicate your data or move your data from where it's already existing into another platform and having to learn that entire platform. So let's take a closer look at how shortcuts and mirroring make this possible. But before we do that, let's actually try and focus at one of the experiences that allows you to bring in your data from multiple sources, and that will be Data Factory. And we're going to talk about it a little bit to just understand how you are able to do that with Data Factory, and you have the different artifacts that are available inside of Data Factory, which will allow you to bring in your data. So in this case, even for you, as you are completing this hackathon and one of your projects that you're doing, you're gonna be thinking about how you can be able to bring in your data. Let's say, for an example, this is existing in a CSV file, or maybe it's real-time data that is coming from a public API that is constantly being updated in real time. So Data Factory, like I mentioned earlier on, allows you to bring data from the different places or different data sources that are available for you to use. And some of the items that you can use with the Data Factory are data pipelines. And those pipelines allow you to ingest at scale and schedule your data workflows. So one thing that you can think about with pipelines, they go hand in hand with you would have like a copy job or copy action inside of a pipeline, so that you can be able to copy some of your data. If, for an example, it exists in an Azure SQL database and you want to copy that data into a lake house inside of Microsoft Fabric, so you can further transform it, or you can further gain insights and create visualizations from that. So you could use a pipeline, and so that you can be able to copy that data from your data source. But also another thing that you can be able to do inside of Data Factory, one of the artifacts that you can use is the Dataflow Gen2. A Dataflow Gen2 allows you to do more than just ingesting your data inside of Fabric. So you can ingest your data from the different data sources that are available to you. Could be like a CSV file, like I mentioned earlier on, or it could be an already existing Azure SQL database that you may have. But inside of a Dataflow Gen2, you are able to then take it a step further, where you are preparing your data, you are cleaning it, and you are transforming it. And how you do this, you use queries. You can create new queries that allow you to prep, clean, and transform your data, so that you can create new queries that have your transformed and cleaned data ready to use, and you can be able to send it to a destination. And your destination could be either a lake house, could be an event house, or it could be a data warehouse in this case. And then you have a mirrored database. And mirrored database in this case, we are going to look at it from the perspective of open mirroring, but just a quick overview of that is that you can be able to easily replicate data from an existing source into OneLake. So if you have an already existing source and you want to bring in that data inside of OneLake, you could use a mirrored database. And a copy job allows you to just copy your data easily with settings for full, incremental, or event-based copy jobs that you can be able to use. But that's one way of ingesting data inside of Fabric, or that's one of the few ways of ingesting data into Fabric by using the Data Factory experience or workload inside of Fabric by using, let's say, for an example, a data pipeline or a Dataflow Gen2. Let's say, for an example, you want to use already existing data and you do not want to write, or you want to build a data pipeline. So instead of writing a pipeline, inside of Fabric, you are able to point a shortcut at a folder of raw files like your CSVs or text and create a live data table, delta table on top of that CSV file. And what I mean about that is you could have your CSV file already existing somewhere else. It could be, let's say, for an example, a storage account on Azure. You can be able to create a shortcut to that storage account so that you can get that CSV file and create a delta table on top of it inside of Fabric, so that you can then further be able to get insights from it. So every 2 minutes, Fabric will then scan for changes and automatically sync to that data without any orchestration being needed. And if you're dealing with stuff like text, for an example, customer reviews or emails, you can be able to apply built-in AI transformations, such as the sentiment analysis, entity tagging, or PII reduction, which is personally identifiable information reduction. And you can be able to do that inside of Microsoft Fabric using those shortcuts. And this is a recent feature that you can be able to use with shortcuts inside of Fabric, which is a really great feature. Now, we've looked at how you could use a Dataflow Gen2, let's say data pipeline, or use the Data Factory experience inside of Fabric. And then we looked at if you do not want to build a data pipeline, which is you're not using the Data Factory experience, and you just want to point Fabric to your already existing data, what do you then do, right? You then build out a shortcut. But now let's look at something else, where we're looking at database mirroring. So what is database mirroring really? So mirroring inside of Microsoft Fabric is designed to help you reflect your entire external database into OneLake. It does not only help you bring the initial data, but it also keeps up all the changes up to date, reflecting into OneLake. Mirroring can be done through your change data capture based replication, which we called database mirroring, where we physically replicate data from your source, like your Snowflake, your Azure SQL database, and Cosmos DB mirroring into OneLake, where we keep it up to date. So you can be able to keep your data up to date inside of Fabric by using mirroring. And another type of mirroring, again, which I alluded to earlier on, is another type of mirroring that we alluded on is where you can be able to synchronize metadata instead of replicating that data. So that other type of mirroring, for an example, you could also use something like open mirroring. So for an example, if you're mirroring in Azure Databricks, for example, so mirroring for Azure Databricks, you are able to synchronize catalog names, your schemas, your table definitions, and you can be able to create shortcuts underneath the hood and inside of Fabric, and you are able to bring in all of this data from these different data sources that you have. In this case, could be your databases that you're looking at, your Azure SQL database, like I mentioned earlier on, or it could be Snowflake in this case. This other type of mirroring, right? When you look at mirroring in Fabric, it provides an easy experience to avoid complex ETL, which is extract, transform, load, and integrate your existing data into OneLake with the rest of your data in Microsoft Fabric. You can continuously replicate your data directly into Fabric's OneLake. But with open mirroring, in this case, it will enable any application to write change data directly into a mirrored database inside of Fabric. Open mirroring is also designed to be extensible, customizable, and open. It's a powerful feature that extends mirroring in Fabric based on the open Delta Lake table format. Once the data lands inside of OneLake, inside of Fabric, open mirroring will then simplify the handling of your complex data changes, ensuring that all mirrored data is continuously up to date and ready for analysis. And you can be able to have like a live view of your data from these different data sources that you may be using it with open mirroring in this case. So we've looked at an overview of the different kinds of ways where you can be able to bring your data from all of these different places inside of Fabric. So we looked at using the data factory experience inside of Fabric through let's say, for an example, Dataflows Gen2 or data pipelines. We also looked at shortcuts. We also looked at mirroring, and we looked at open mirroring. Now, what I want us to do is to actually switch over to my my browser so that we can be able to see these things hands-on. So if you've never experienced or you don't have any experience with Microsoft Fabric, where you are ingesting your data from all these different kinds of places, we're going to look at a demo that's going to allow you to bring data from these different kinds of sources. It could be a CSV file, it could be an event stream, or it could be real-time data using real-time intelligence, or it could be mirroring inside of Fabric. So what I will do is just stop sharing so I can be able to share my browser again, so I can show you how we can be able to ingest data inside of Microsoft Fabric. So if I share my screen now, and I put my browser in the screen, so hopefully that's there. Okay, awesome. Now, I'm inside of Microsoft Fabric, so if you've never navigated into Fabric, you could go to app.fabric.microsoft.com, and then it will take you to the Fabric homepage. I already have a workspace that's already set up for this specific session, but if you don't know how to create workspaces inside of Microsoft Fabric, if it's your first time with Fabric as part of this hackathon, you can go to Workspaces, you click on New Workspace, and then you just provide the workspace. You give it a name, and then you provide the licensing that you have. Is it a trial license that you have, or is it a paid Fabric capacity? In this case, I'm using a Fabric capacity that's already paid. Now, my workspace is empty. A workspace, if you don't know what a workspace is more of a container of your resources that you're actually using inside of Fabric, or the artifacts that you're using throughout your data journey, and you're able to share this with everyone that is part of your team. So what we're going to do is to actually create some artifacts that will allow us to ingest our data, but also store the ingested data inside of Fabric. So the first thing that we're going to need is to actually create a lakehouse. A lakehouse is going to house my data in a way that, for an example, if I want to store my CSV files, I'll store them in my lakehouse, or if I want to later then transform those CSV files into Delta tables, I can then transform them into data tables inside of that same lakehouse. So what I'm going to do is select new item. And then once I've done that, I'm going to quickly search for lakehouse. And we're just going to name it Zava Lakehouse. And I'll just toggle that setting on, which is Lakehouse schemas. And then I'll select create. So our lakehouse, if you've never seen a lakehouse before, is just going to come with some folders that we can be able to use. So you'll have a tables folder where you'll be able to see all of your tables and the schema and the tables inside of that schema. And then you'll have files, right? And files would be you then uploading directly into your lakehouse, the CSV files that you would then later on use and change or transform into Delta tables that you can then be able to transform the data that's in there and use it for your insights. And there's different ways of getting your data into a lakehouse. For an example, you could upload files like I mentioned earlier on, or you could create a shortcut. But we're going to look at that a bit later on. The first thing that we have to look at is how do you then use a Dataflow Gen2 to actually ingest that data, and then you can be able to see a Dataflow Gen2 in play. But another option is using a new pipeline. So when you're using a new pipeline, that's where you are then connecting to, let's say, an Azure SQL database that's already existing that you have. Let's say your application is using Azure SQL, and you just want to replicate the data from Azure SQL into Microsoft Fabric. Then you can use a pipeline and you copy that data from Azure SQL into your lakehouse. In our case, let's just use a new Dataflow Gen2. This Dataflow Gen2 will then allow us to ingest our data. So what I'm going to do is to name it as load data. Now select create. In my scenario, I have a few CSV files that I'm using that I want to get all of that data inside of OneLake through Fabric. And that data is going to be data that's going to be used for, let's say, later transformations, later visualizations with Power BI, and maybe later AI insights that I want to draw from that data. So once I've created the Dataflow Gen2, there's a few options here that you see that are available, which is you import your data from an Excel spreadsheet or from an SQL or SQL server, or from a text or CSV file, or from an already existing data flow that you're already using to actually import that data. Right? If you don't want to use those options, you could select get data from another source, and then if you get to this dialog box or this pop-up, you'll be able to see the different sources that you can be able to use. Like for an example, the ones that are already available to you are the ones that we saw on that earlier view, where you are able to see an Excel workbook, a SQL Server database, a SharePoint folder, a SharePoint list, a Power BI data flows, which is the legacy data flow, the data flows from Power Platform, Dataverse, if you're using Dataverse. If we click on View More in this case, you will then start to see all of the other different data sources that you can be able to use to bring your data in here. Like if it's a folder, if it's a PDF file, if it's a Pocket file, or in this case, if it's a Snowflake database, a data warehouse, data mats, a KQL database, for an example, an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. You might see that one a bit later on as we go on with the demo. There's a lot of options for you to be able to use. Another thing during this hackathon, because I know when I'm doing hackathons as well, is that I may be trying to use some already existing data from an API. Maybe it's not real-time data. So you could potentially use this option here, which was old data that could be coming from from an API that's existing. So you just pull that data from there instead of having to download the files from that place. So you could use the OData option here, and then you can bring that data in. So these are all the options that are available for you to bring in your data from everywhere, basically, inside of Microsoft Fabric, and then you can be able to use that data to then do everything that you need, be it you are building visualizations or you are preparing your data for AI. So in our case, we're going to use text or CSV. So I'm going to select text or CSV because I have CSV files that I am using today. Another option here is that you could link to a file that's already existing with the CSV file. So it could be a file that's already existing in a storage somewhere. In this case, could be OneDrive or SharePoint. So I could paste the path here, and then I can be able to get that data and ingest it inside of this Dataflows Gen2. But in my case, I'm going to be uploading it locally. So I'm going to select upload file. And then in this case, for an example, when I select upload file, seems like this is not set up for my account. But when you select upload file, what's supposed to be happening here, you'll have an option to, you would have an option to actually upload the file from your CSV, from your local machine, and then you can be able to create a query inside of the Dataflow Gen2 so that you can be able to ingest that data and send it to your lakehouse in this case. So I'm going to leave this here because I forgot to set this up earlier on, where I need to have a OneDrive for Business license so that I can be able to upload the file into OneDrive. But if I already had an existing one in a link, I would then provide that option here. So we're going to leave this and select cancel. So we're going to leave that text or CSV file. Maybe we're going to come back to it. But what I wanted to show you was to just how you can then import that data from your local CSV file, and then you can then be able to start manipulating it or cleaning that data, transforming it using those queries inside of the Dataflow Gen2, because you'll have all of these different options. Like for an example, if we have that, you'll have the options to add a row, to remove a column, to remove a row, to filter your data, creating new queries and all of those things. And then you would need to provide a destination for your query. So when you provide a destination for your query, you just select add, and then you point it to the lakehouse that you're going to be using. So we're gonna park our Dataflow Gen2 on the side for now, since my OneDrive for Business is not necessarily initialized. Maybe I'll initialize it later and then I'll show you. And then the other thing that we're just going to move to is to how you can then be able to use shortcuts to get that data in. So the reason I'm going to be using shortcuts in this case is because my data, I have my CSV files in my local machine, but I also have my CSV files in a storage account in Azure. So we're going to do that together. So let me navigate back. To my workspace, and inside of my workspace, I'm just going to go straight to my lakehouse. In my lakehouse, right? So again, let's just circle back a little bit to the to getting your CSV file into your lakehouse using the Dataflow Gen2. So if that step doesn't work for you, for an example, you can always just select these three dots and then select upload, and then select upload files, and then you can select that folder feature, and then you just locate your CSV files. And in my case, my CSV files are existing in this folder. So if I could choose one of the CSVs, let me choose one that has less data. That sales data has a lot, so it could take up some time. And then if you select open, when you select upload, that should upload the CSV file into your lakehouse. Now, what is the difference between you uploading your CSV file and ingesting your data through this step and using the Dataflow Gen2? There's one that I prefer over the other. I prefer using the Dataflow Gen2 just purely because the minute you provide a destination for the Dataflow Gen2, it will create the Delta table for you inside of the lakehouse. So you would then see the table, once the Dataflow Gen 2 runs successfully, you'll see the table created underneath the tables folder inside of your lakehouse. Yet with this option, you just have the CSV file uploaded under the files folder. So that seems to have done finished doing that. And then if I go back here, if I go back to my files and I select refresh, what I will then see is my CSV file. Again, for us to be able to use the data in the CSV file, maybe let's say for an example, we don't want to use it raw like this with the CSV file, we want it into a table so that we can create a semantic model, and then after that we visualize that data. We will then need to create a new notebook inside of Fabric, and that notebook will then allow us to be able to transform or get the data from the CSV file and then create a Delta table out of that so that we can have it here. And that's a lot of steps for me, especially if I'm part of a hackathon. I would be like, okay, I prefer the Dataflow Gen 2 step where I can be able to upload the CSV file, do my transformations, click publish, and then after that, the table will be created automatically for me inside of my lakehouse, and then I can then use it a bit later on with my semantic model. So that's one option. Now let's go back to getting our data using shortcuts. How do you use shortcuts inside of Fabric to actually get your data? In this case, again, we'll still stick around here. What we're going to do is to click Files. And when we click Files, we can select this option called New Shortcut. And New Shortcut gives us a few different options. You could shortcut into internal sources. So internal sources are sources that are within Microsoft OneLake. Remember, I said Microsoft OneLake is your OneDrive for data. So if you already have, for an example, a semantic model that's already exists, another semantic model is already existing inside of OneLake, and you want to shortcut data that's already existing inside of Fabric, you can use this option to shortcut to that data. But if you want to use external sources like your Amazon S3, you could shortcut to that, your Azure Blob Storage, your Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, your Dataverse, your Google Cloud Storage, and so forth. But in our case, we're going to use the Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, shortly known as ADLS Gen 2. So I'm going to choose that. And then if I already had an existing connection, for example, I already have one, but let's say I wanted to create a new connection, right? If you create a new connection, you'd have to provide the credentials to your blob storage or your storage account, where you provide the URL, you provide the connection name, and all of those things that you're going to need. Let's actually do that together. I'm going to navigate back to my Azure portal, and then I'm going to go to my storage account called Zava Data. And if I select that, let's zoom in so that you can be able to see this a bit better. So if I select that, I go to containers, and then inside of my containers for my storage account, I have a few different containers. So let's use the Litware data container so I can show you the different CSV files that are inside of that container. So if I wanted to get all of the CSV files inside of OneLake or inside of Microsoft Fabric so I can use it later on, I would need to have access to this container. And if I don't want to be like clicking on this file, downloading it, and then going back to Microsoft Fabric, re-uploading the file, let's use the shortcuts to actually do that. So to do that, I'm going to navigate back to my container. I need a few things. Firstly, I need the endpoint that I can be able to use here, right? The endpoints, so if I go to settings and I select endpoints for my storage container, I will delete this a bit later on, by the way, if you're using these endpoints that are here. So if I look for my endpoint container here, for an example, the one that I want to use is the data lake storage. Remember, we're using the ADLS Gen 2 or Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage that we're going to use to shortcut into ADLS, into Fabric, so that we can be able to get that data. So I'm going to copy this, and then it'll stay it's going to stay inside of my clipboard. And then we're going to go to security and networking. I need an access key So I'm going to select access keys here quickly. I'm going to say show, copy that key, and then I'm going to hide it so you guys don't use it a bit later on. So let's navigate to Fabric. Now what we need to do is to provide those credentials inside of Fabric so we can shortcut into that storage account. So I need to provide, firstly, the URL for that. So it seems like I already connected to it, but let's create a new connection. So if I provide the URL, the next thing that I need to do is to provide the access key to the storage account. So I'm going to change the authentication kind from organizational account to account key, and then I'll paste in my account key quickly. Then the next thing that I need to do is select next. Once I've selected next, I'm going to select not now. Once I've selected next, I should be able to have, in a way, a preview of the storage containers that are in my storage account. The one that I'm interested in is Litware Data. And in that, what I am looking for, I will select the Litware Data storage container, and then I'm going to select next. That will then allow me to create a shortcut to Litware Data from within OneLake to the storage account. Another option, remember as I was going through the slides, is to actually be able to use AI to, for example, do PII reduction if my data has PII reduction. So in this case, I can transform this data using shortcuts, but we're not going to do that today. You're going to have this more spoken about in the upcoming sessions, especially the AI ones. So I'm going to select skip for this, and then we can be able to see the shortcut to the container from our storage account. Then I'm going to select create. This will then create the shortcut to that container. And then what you will then be able to see, if I select this shortcut to that, you'll be able to start seeing the CSV files from the storage account. So we're able to just create a shortcut to that storage account, and then we're able to have access to the CSV files, for an example. Let's say we wanted to make these tables into a Delta table, for an example, and we want to make them into data tables so that we can be able to either visualize the data or do something else with that data. So the only way, one of the ways that you can be able to do that is to just select open a notebook, select new notebook, and then this will create a notebook for you inside of Fabric. And I find this way much more effective because your data source has already been added into your notebook because you created it inside of your lakehouse. So you can be able to see the lakehouse inside of here. And then if I expand files, I can be able to see Litware Data. Now, the big question would be, where's products.csv, the one that we uploaded directly? It's there, but you won't be able to see it when you toggle or when you expand this dropdown for your files. You won't be able to see it, but it is there. Now, let's just quickly replace this data, and then let's provide, let's actually provide some Python code to actually transform that. So I already put this together for this session, so I just need to make sure the indentation works fine. So basically what this Python code does is go through each of the CSV files from the shortcut, not the product CSV file that we uploaded, but it goes through each of the CSV files inside of the shortcut, and then it creates a Delta table for each of those CSV files, which on its own actually takes some time. So if I select run there, we can then be able to start seeing the code cell inside of our notebook running, and then we'll be able to just go through each of those CSV files, creating a related Delta table so that we can be able to use it a bit later on. So we've already covered, let's say, 2 ways of ingesting your data. Yes, the first one didn't work. That's on me because I didn't set up Dataflow Gen2. but it's a bit simple for you to be able to ingest data using the Dataflow Gen2. You just create the Dataflow Gen2 for yourself. And then once you've done that, you choose a text or CSV if you are bringing in your data using a CSV file, and then you just upload the CSV file, and then it will create a query of that CSV file or a preview of what that table would then look like. And then after that, you publish your Dataflow Gen2. Now we're looking at shortcuts. We've already created a shortcut to the storage container. We have access to the CSV files. Now we're just trying to create delta tables out of that. But then again, once we've created those delta tables from the CSV files, we should be able to see them inside of our lakehouse. So if I go to tables and I select refresh, and then once that's done, I would then need to expand. The DBO schema, and we can be able to see all of the tables created for each corresponding CSV file. So these are the delta tables for these CSV files that we had right over. If we go to our data storage, right over here. So we're able to shortcut to this container and then be able to have access to the CSV files, but then take it a step further and make them into delta tables that we have here, so we can be able to use them either for creating a Power BI report, or be it we want to be able to use it for AI, if we want to build data agents and then later on build AI agents inside of Foundry or something like that. Okay. Cool. Another thing that I saw as I was going with Fabric as well is that if, for an example, you had created or you had mirrored data inside of Microsoft Fabric, let's say you're using Azure Databricks, in which something I'll show you just quickly, is that you can then be able to just click on these three dots. Once you've clicked on that refresh, you can click on the three dots of the tables, and you'll have like an option. For an example, maybe you want to shortcut to an already existing schema that is coming from Azure Databricks, or coming from the data that you mirrored using Azure Databricks. Then that's also something that is available for you to be able to do, and that option is something that you will probably see here. In one of these folders as well. So this data is ready for us to be able to use with Power BI, ready to use with Copilot, ready to use with data agents, so that we can be able to get AI insights from it, or we want to build visualizations to analyze that data. So we've covered Dataflow Gen2, we've covered shortcuts. Let's actually look at how you can be able to mirror data inside of Fabric. We're not going to do actual mirroring, but I'm just going to take you to a certain step where you are able to see how you can be able to mirror your data. So if you want to mirror data from Azure Databricks, I'll just quickly show you for an example. So let's navigate back to the workspace that we created for this hackathon. And then inside of this workspace, for you to be able to mirror your, let's say your Azure Databricks data into Fabric, into OneLake, what you would then need to do is to select new item here, and then you'll see the option here. For example, if I just search for mirror, you'll see there is mirrored Azure Cosmos DB, there is mirrored Azure Database for Postgres DB, there is mirrored Azure Databricks catalog, so you're mirroring your Azure Databricks catalog inside of Microsoft Fabric. There's mirrored Azure SQL Database, there's mirrored Azure SQL Managed Instance, there's mirrored database. We're going to look at this quickly just now, and there's other wide variety of options for you to be able to mirror your data from other places. Now, before we continue, what I want to quickly note is that with you using a data pipeline, for an example, and you're copying your data from one data source into Fabric, what's happening is that majority of the time it's like you're moving your data from that one place into Fabric, or you are copying or making replicas of that data, or you're duplicating your data into Fabric. However, with mirroring, it's more on you are mirroring the data that's already existing inside of your data source. So it will mirror whatever schemas that you have there and whatever data that you have there, whatever changes that you make inside of that original data source, they will come on this side without duplicating the data that is already existing inside of your original source and also inside of your destination source. So that's a difference between your data pipelines, for an example, and mirroring, because mirroring is more on you having a more of an in-sync view of your data without duplicating it. Whereas with copy jobs, you would then need to with copy jobs, you would then need to probably duplicate most of the data that you're using. Right. So let's look at mirroring quickly, just a snapshot of mirroring. So you would select, for an example, if it's Azure Databricks, you select Azure Databricks. And then if you have an already existing catalog, so I have one, so I'm going to show you how to mirror that data into Fabric. But if you want to create a new connection to your Azure Databricks catalog, if you already have one that's set up, you would then create a new connection. You will provide a workspace URL to your Azure Databricks. And then when you're creating this connection, your authentication, just make sure you set it up as service principal, because that works best. So you use service principal, where you'd have to provide your tenant ID, your service principal client ID, your service principal key, and so forth. And then you can then be able to start mirroring that data. So let's use the existing connection because I didn't copy and paste my credentials in my clipboard. So if we use this existing connection for an example, so this is my Azure Databricks catalog workspace. So if I select next, this next step in this dialog box is to choose the catalog that I want to mirror into Fabric, right? So if I select catalog, I have the Litwa Unity catalog for an example. And then I would have to provide the schema or select the schemas that I want to mirror into Fabric. So I want to mirror the default and the rec schema inside. And then I'm going to select next. So I have to make sure that this is checked, because it's to automatically sync future catalog changes for the selected schema. And then I'm going to select next. And then the name of the mirrored schema. So in this case, I'll just leave everything as default. I'm going to select create. And then once I've selected create, in this case, it'll create shortcuts for the mirrored Azure Databricks catalog. What's fun about mirroring Azure Databricks catalog is that you are mirroring the entire catalog from Azure Databricks that you've provided as you're going through the different steps. So what you will see here, this is Azure Databricks, and the tables, for an example, you see the reg schema that we've mirrored, and then you'll see the tables that are existing there. And there are shortcuts to those tables that are existing in our Azure Databricks catalog. So that's how you can be able to create mirroring or use mirroring to get your data from one source inside of Fabric. And in this case, we're using Azure Databricks, right? I can view the SQL endpoint for this. And the SQL endpoint is basically me. I can be able to run queries, like I can run new SQL queries against that mirrored data inside of Microsoft Fabric. I can create views that I want to create and so forth. So you can see that schema is there. I can expand that. You can see the tables and so forth. Another thing that I want to also focus on is if we navigate back to the workspace. So I'm going to select Fabric Hackathon again. Let's see if we can be able to go back to the lakehouse and look for something. So if I try to refresh, you may have noticed earlier on when I was talking about you being able to create a shortcut to a table in here, and there was no option to do that. So for an example, if you click on those three dots again, you'll have an option to say new table shortcut. Why? That's because we have another schema that's already existing now inside of OneLake. So that schema is the one that we mirrored from Azure Databricks. So if, for an example, you want to use your data that you uploaded with the CSV files that has come from your storage account, but you also want to use the data that you mirrored from Azure Databricks into Fabric, but you want to use them in one lakehouse instead of separate lakehouse because you want to build visualizations using both data sets, you can create that new table shortcut and you just select new table shortcut. Instead of choosing the external sources, we use Microsoft OneLake. Once you've selected Microsoft OneLake, you choose the Unity catalog, which is the catalog that we actually mirrored inside Fabric from Azure Databricks. You choose the second one, and then when you select next, it's going to ask which tables you want to mirror from that schema. So you just expand that, and then you choose the tables that you want to shortcut to from that specific schema. So if you select next, and then you select create, again, it'll create shortcuts for you from that already existing schema from the mirrored Azure Databricks into your lakehouse as well. So again, this is the OneLake being your OneDrive for your data being in play, because now we have data that is existing inside of OneLake, but one is created shortcuts from a storage account, the other we created shortcuts from a Unity catalog from Azure Databricks, but now we're bringing them together and we have access to do that through shortcuts, right? So if you wanted to do more with that data, you can see all of these tables that are coming from Azure Databricks. You can be able to see them being shortcut inside of our schema, and we can be able to use it. Cool. Now let's look at the other option of getting your data inside of Microsoft Fabric, and then we wrap up the session. So if I go back to my workspace and I select Fabric Hackathon again, now another option here, we looked at Dataflow Gen2, even though it didn't work out, but we also looked at shortcuts. We looked at different kinds of shortcuts. By the way, we use shortcuts with the storage accounts. Now we also use shortcuts with mirroring Azure Databricks catalog, and then we use shortcuts with mirroring the mirrored data inside of with shortcutting the mirrored data inside of a lakehouse. So now the next one that we're going to do is to use open mirroring. So we're gonna just look at a quick overview of what open mirroring, but there's more that you can do with open mirroring. So how do you then start with open mirroring? What you can do is select a new item inside of your workspace and then search for mirrored. And what you can then do is choose mirrored database. This is, with open mirroring, you are able to bring data from everywhere that you actually want to bring into. So you can be able to land in your data via an API or manually, which is what we're going to do now using the drag and drop UI or user experience inside of Fabric. So we're going to select mirrored database, and we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to say Zava sales. Then I select create. And once I create that, it will then provision a mirrored database, provision a SQL analytics endpoint that we can then be able to use in future. We'll configure replication, and then we'll start replicating some of the data once we've provided that. So that normally takes a while. So we're covering everything that is available inside of Microsoft Fabric, really, with bringing in your data. The other option, which I'll probably get into as we wait for this to actually do this, but the other option is Eventstreams, and that's for real-time data, but you probably hear more about it in the real-time session. So great. The mirrored database has been set up for us. Now, how do we then start with open mirroring? One of the ways that we're going to use today is uploading files, but the other way is using open mirroring through an API. So we'll probably share more details in the Discord channel on how you can be able to use the APIs with open mirroring using the Python SDK, for an example. So the way that we're going to use is to upload files, basically. And this one you'll see how different it is from what I did earlier on with the shortcuts and then creating Delta tables with that. So how do you do this? So I'll select upload files, then I'll select browse, And then I'm going to choose just one of the CSV files that I have there, which is sales. And then I'm going to select open. And then in this pop-up, I need to provide this, this table that I want to use open mirroring with a name. So the name that I'm going to give it, I'm going to say Zava sales. Why not? If, for an example, I want to specify like a primary key because maybe later on I want to update the data or delete data based on a specific key matching the key that I specify, then I can provide the primary key column. But in this case, I'm not going to provide that. You'll see all of the other file format settings, which is just specifying how your file format looks like. Is it a comma, delimiter, or any other of those options when you're uploading your CSV file? Encoding, is it UTF-8, and so forth. And then you can see the preview of this data. Now, what I'm going to do is select Create Table, which would then create the table using open mirroring. Now, I hope I actually clicked Create Table. Okay, I've done that. Right, so this takes a while, right? So as that's doing that, let me explain what would be different here. With what I did earlier on with shortcuts is that I shortcutted into my already existing storage account that has CSV files. And once I have done that, I can see the shortcut folder inside of my Lakehouse, for an example. Once I've seen that shortcut folder, I see the CSV files, and those CSV files that I've seen there, I then wanted to create Delta tables out of that. What then we did after that was create a notebook. The notebook would provide some Python code to actually create the Delta tables. Now, that was a lot of steps in one to actually do that and to get our data inside of Microsoft Fabric into our workspace. With open mirroring, the difference is this will then, you upload the CSV file. You can see this has finished doing the replication. You can upload the CSV file. And what it would do, for an example, you see here uploaded files being the Zava sales in the folder. We have the file being replicated inside of OneLake. We have access to it, and it's like .csv file. But the other part that is so interesting with open mirroring is that all of those steps that I did with the shortcuts, I don't need to do that. What do I mean by that? Is that it'll create a database, a schema for me, and it will provide a Delta table that's already created for me that I can be able to query, for an example. Let me show you how that actually looks like. So you can see the tables already created. If I switch from mirrored database here at the top to the SQL Analytics endpoint, similar to what I showed you with the Unity catalog, for an example, I can run a SQL query against that table because it's already a Delta table that is created for me. I didn't need to set up a new notebook or go back to that notebook and write some Python code to be able to create a Delta table out of that CSV file that I uploaded with open mirroring. So if I click on those three dots next to Zava sales and I say select the top 100, it'll run the SQL query for me, and then I can be able to see that data. But with a CSV file, I wouldn't be able to do this. And again, if I wanted to take this data, the open mirrored data, into that lakehouse so that I can be able to create like a unified semantic model, I can then shortcut into the schema and then get the table myself a bit later on. So basically what we just did here, we just used the UI, the user experience with open mirroring. You can do so much more with open mirroring than what I just shown you. This was just a brief overview of what it looks like to use open mirroring. You could use it with APIs, you could use it with the Python SDK so that you can be able to, for an example, do open mirroring maybe with files already existing inside of your local machine, but you want to bring them into OneLake. And another thing with open mirroring, as you change the data inside of those files, for an example, is that those changes could be also replicated inside of OneLake through open mirroring. So basically, that's it with open mirroring. So we've covered Dataflow Gen2, which is just the standard way of bringing in your data inside of Microsoft Fabric. And then the next thing that we covered was shortcuts. So when we used shortcuts, we shortcutted into data that is existing in a storage account. And then after doing that from a storage account, we then made sure that we created Delta tables. And then after creating Delta tables out of that data, we then moved on to mirroring the data inside of Microsoft Fabric. And when we mirrored that data inside of Fabric, we're able to get the data from Azure Databricks, and we're able to do a shortcut on that mirrored data inside of our lakehouse. And then we did open mirroring right now. The other option later on, maybe in the real-time intelligence session, you'll be able to see how you can be able to bring in your data using an event stream, and you can be able to do that for real-time data. Since time is against us, I won't be able to cover that, but you can be able to see that in a upcoming session from there. So what I'm going to do now is to head back to my slides. There's a few housekeeping things that I wanted to show you. So that's it for my demo. So I'm just going to quickly show you a few housekeeping things that I want to remind you about the hackathon. But basically, I hope now you guys have an understanding of of how you can be able to bring data into Microsoft Fabric from all of these different sources, and how you can be able to make use of OneLake being the OneDrive for data to be able to build something unified with the data that you bring in from those different places. Now, few housekeeping things is that obviously we have guided learn modules for this hackathon. So the FabCon Skills Challenge will provide tailored learning modules for each hackathon category to enhance your skills. So what we covered here, so what I covered here for this specific session in terms of shortcuts, bring in your data using Dataflows Gen2 and open mirroring, you'll be able to find in the FabCon Skills Challenge. If you need any support, there's a Discord channel for us that offers real-time support and fosters community interaction among us, and obviously among you guys who are completing this hackathon. So if you have questions from the session as well, burning questions, you can, if I don't get to them today, you can just put them on the Discord channel. I can be able to reply there, and I'll have my teammates also doing that. And also we have Hackathon Docs, where you have the GitHub repository that contains all of the submission guidelines and example projects for your reference. So if you are looking for guidelines on how to submit your project and you have your project already going, you can look at the GitHub repository there. And where can you find all of these things? You can find them in those QR codes that are provided. So you have the Hackathon home, which would be the GitHub repository. You also have the Hackathon Discord channel. So you can scan the second QR code on the screen. So I'm going to give you a second, and you can be able to ask your questions on the Discord channel about open mirroring, shortcuts, event streams, everything that I covered today. I'll be able to assist you, and my teammates will also be able to assist you. I mean, people from the product team will also be providing some support during this hackathon on that Discord channel if you have questions. And if you want to learn more about what are the upcoming live streams that are coming, you can find them on the third QR code, which is the Hackathon live stream series, to see what's the next session. Speaking of the next session, make sure to attend the Build Real Data Solutions with Real-Time Intelligence in Fabric with Alvaro, who's also my teammate. So make sure that you do not miss this specific session, because this session will be covering real-time intelligence, and it will probably be talking about event streams and how you can be able to ingest real-time data inside of Microsoft Fabric. But other than that, that's it for me. And I want to say thank you so much for coming in and listening in, and good luck with your hackathon projects, and looking forward to seeing the awesomeness that you guys are going to be building.
Thank you all for joining, and thank you to our speakers. This session is a part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. We'll see you at the next one.